sold out. We won't be able to do any more for that. Kilkerran, same jam, completely sold out. Those are both have been doubled. The Burns Bash, our whiskey festival that took place of a classy Robbie Burns dinner, which we were told we were not allowed to do because we were taking business away from bars and restaurants. So instead, we just invite people to come in store and consume as much as they merrily can in a 2-hour period, and that's okay. But we we can't do that other thing. Evan and Harmony have got a Blinded by Bourbon coming up. There's an intro to single malt in store. There's other stuff as well. You can see lots of people trickling in here. The Nika tasting, we're going to get a new photo up for this, but this range doesn't just include that Nika 90th anniversary decanter. It is also going to include a Chichibu single cask bottled for Alberta, malt and grain from Ichiro, and then a range of things from the Nika portfolio to celebrate the 90th anniversary. And Ardbeg is sold out too. So many sold out. We've been excited to see how quickly some of these tastings have filled. Bowmore, there's still some space in, and then we'll be adding some more events for February and March. Probably in the new year. I don't think we'll put any more up before the holiday, but yeah, I've been excited. I couldn't believe the demand for that Octomore tasting, especially, is completely filled up, and we had to double it, and that's filled up. So obviously people are excited to have some drams with us, Evan. They haven't tired of our shtick yet.
Yeah. Sorry, the screen sharing thing is in a weird spot for me. It took a while to get to. Yeah, so that's we do have a lot of tastings coming up. Should mention too that before, or the next tasting before the Advent next not an Advent calendar tasting, I think there are a few spots left for the old and rare Ben Romick tasting that's happening on Thursday.
Yeah, I think someone's been dormanting it, so I had to activate it again because I'm pretty sure there are kits. It's an insane range on Tuesday. Not inexpensive, but it's truly an insane range of whiskeys, and worth doing. And if you can't do it, it'll almost certainly get put on sale in the new year when we get rid of all the stuff that we've got surplus kits of, but it's an awesome range. Evan, we started not only on time, but technically early with our ramblings, because I am not where I normally am, hence the blurred background. And I only have one glass for my tasting tonight because I flew with my drams, so I have them all. I'm not going to be unboxing tonight. And I'm going to be limited in my speed round by, I think, doing shots if we go that route, because I'll have to clear the glass and do
bottle. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I hadn't even considered straight from the bottle. That's a very clever idea. So it'll be less classy.
The nose, but the palate should be okay.
No nose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we get rolling, or should we
Yeah.
do we have anything else to entice people with? Unfortunately, this crowd cannot benefit from the quote unquote GST holiday, at least not on the things they presumably like to drink most of the time. But incidentally, we should note, if you are buying wine from our website, we have opted not to reprogram it at great expense for a 2-month period. So yes, your total online will show GST, but no, you won't be charged it. So let's just put that out there.
And us whiskey drinkers, unfortunately, still have to pay the GST, as we always do.
Yeah. We have to fund government.
That's right.
It's a great responsibility.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a place that's familiar with dodging taxes when it comes to whiskey, which is Ireland.
Brilliant segue, Evan.
Yeah.
Historically accurate and tantalizing segue into something a little different.
Yeah.
This year's calendar.
So what we have for whiskey number 1 in this set number 3, or whiskey, which this is 11, the 11th whiskey in the Not an Advent Calendar Full Monty edition, is Bushmills 21-year-old. This is the first time, I believe, we've had a Bushmills or the first time we've had an official Bushmills, at least. In the whiskey calendars,
because we did have one of those boutiquey psychedelic horse face whiskeys in 1 year, which, as we all know, are Bushmills as well.
Yeah, that's right. So Bushmills, although I made the tax dodge joke, which is how single pot whiskey that Ireland touts came around, where they used unmalted barley because they were taxed on the malted barley. So
Hmm.
they'd use a portion of unmalted barley in the mash and distillation to sort of not pay as much taxes on the distillation as they would have to otherwise. That's something a lot of distilleries did do when that happened. However, Bushmills was one of them that refused to. Bushmills used 100% malted barley all the way through
Hmm.
for their Irish whiskey. They triple distilled for pretty much the entirety of their life, whether that started in 1608 or in the actual date when Old Bushmills Distillery came into being, which was 1784, I believe. Yeah, so 21-year-old, it is a 40%er, which is maybe one of the only knocks you can give it. A really
Hmm.
nice 21-year-old Irish whiskey that we're starting on here. Aged in a combination of sherry casks and is it Madeira casks in this one as well?
Yeah, I think it's finished in Madeira after maturing in Oloroso and bourbon
And
casks.
bourbon. You got
It
it.
it is such a good whiskey. It's always been a good whiskey. It is frustrating that it is at such a low ABV, but it's fresh, it's fruity. Granted, my tiny glass here does not fit my nose well, so I
Well,
can't really get it in there. But
kind of
yeah,
shrunk in the dryer, it looks like, hey?
yeah. Either that or I've just become much larger and more gigantic.
That's right.
Yeah, decadent, fruity. Uh, you know, Bushmills is I think is a spirit that also shows well as it matures. Like we've seen a lot of, and I think for the longest time everyone assumed they were all Cooley bottlings. But
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember, Evan, we used to get those great 20-something-year-old Teelings until
Yep.
the prices got just, frankly, I can't use the word I was going to use, but nonsensical. Like we're
Hmm.
talking thousands of dollars a bottle for this 20-year-old plus stock of Irish single malt. Uh, Most of it was actually Bushmills. Some of it was Teeling, but it the stuff that went really, really tropical, I think, was the Bushmills stuff. And we've seen it
Interesting.
also from independent bottlers like the Whiskey Agency
Yep.
and others over the years. The Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, I believe, had some older ones way back when.
Yep.
The Teeling stuff, I think, when we saw it, often gave you that sort of red licorice, waxy Twizzlers note, and
Yeah. A
that was
lot of
often the
uh
giveaway.
a lot of peach juice notes to it as well.
Hmm.
Um, this one, it has a really nice nuttiness coming through this with those dried fruits
Hmm.
for me. Almost like a French toast note to it as well on the nose.
Only if you're going to put, I guess we don't call it Aunt Jemima anymore. Only if you're going to put corn syrup on it as opposed to maple syrup, because it's not really
That's right.
that rich, sticky, syrupy note. It's more of that
Hmm.
clean, um, kind of corn syrup note. Even reminds me, I made the mistake once of eating candy corn. I didn't know what it was, so I tried some, and it's dreadful. Um, I think it's more of an American thing than it is something up in
Hmm.
Canada. Are you familiar with candy corn, Evan?
Just avoiding it when I got it in my Halloween uh,
Mm,
trick or treat pillowcase.
mm,
It was usually the last thing to get eaten or the first thing to get thrown out, one or the other.
mm. That was more of a, I suppose, a southern BC thing, because I don't recall in my childhood, I don't recall ever seeing candy corn.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you almost wish you got an apple instead or
Mm,
something.
mhm. Almost, but still
Yep,
not. Still
that's right.
wish you did get an apple.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, well-meaning though that gesture was, I remember also getting apples as a child, and you'd be like, "What's wrong with this person?"
yeah,
Like, um, just turn your light off.
yeah. Well, and
Anyway.
growing up in Creston, getting an apple was like by the time October came around, you couldn't walk anywhere without tripping over apples anyways, because it was all
Hmm.
orchards. But one of the things that was really interesting to me, and maybe other people have some comments on this one, on this to whether it's true or not, but because Bushmills was one of the two surviving distilleries in Ireland for a period of about was it 20 years,
50.
25 years,
Uh,
60 to 85 or so.
89. So yeah,
Yeah.
1960. Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay.
Yeah. So it was at one point owned by DCL, which also owned the other surviving Irish distillery, which was the old Middleton distillery. Bushmills, we're trying their single malt right now, but for Bushmills, the white label and Bushmills Black, it's a blended whiskey. So there's
Mhm.
some grain in there. And apparently, I don't know if this is still the case, but apparently the grain component used to come from Middleton, where because they didn't actually do any grain, it was all pot still single malt or triple distilled single malt that they were producing at Bushmills.
Mhm.
Don't know if they still trade for that to this day. I don't know if they get their grain component from Middleton or somewhere else, but I don't think they have any grain still or continuous
Yeah.
stills on site.
Or Great Northern, I think, which was
Mhm.
the Teeling's father's new distillery after they sold Cooley. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, and I think the details there, I think it was Irish Distillers, which is owned by Pernod for a while, owned Bushmills as well, but then they sold it off after they had tried to buy out Cooley, which the Irish Parliament blocked them from doing. And then I think DCL or Diageo bought Bushmills and owned it for a while, but now it's part of Proximo, which
Mhm.
is I think a rather large company, but I mean, other than Bushmills, I can't think of
It's
anything, maybe
it's
other than Corvo.
predominantly, yeah, it's predominantly North America. Like
Mhm.
the Bushmills distillery, I think, was one of the, if not their first foray outside of North America into
Mhm.
owning anything outside of this continent. Um, they've kind of been quiet in their time since they've purchased the distillery. They don't seem to have changed a lot about what Bushmills does beyond funding the new Causeway distillery, which has come online recently,
Oh.
which essentially doubles the amount that Bushmills can produce if they keep both distilleries running.
Which answers the question, does Ireland need more distilleries? I mean,
Mhm.
for the longest time they did. To be fair,
Yep.
there was only three from 1989 until what, 2015 or 20, no, it was Dingle the first one, I think, first new one to
I think
open up.
Dingle was the first. Yep.
Yeah, so maybe 2010-ish, somewhere in there. Um, but now there's
Okay,
40
first,
odd.
unlock your phone.
Um,
If you update your lock screen
oh,
settings,
Sorry.
next time I
Google thinks I'm talking to it apparently.
Google. Evan, you probably touched on this on your blog, but we haven't addressed it, and everyone knows I love to point this out. Bushmills makes big hay over the fact that they're the oldest whiskey distillery in the world,
Yes.
which is not true. It's a clever marketing ploy. Um, and I even when the brand ambassadors, if I have to sit through a Bushmills tasting, and the whiskey's good, but often the spiel they have, which also involves the fact that, the Irish don't peat their whiskey and the Scots do, and that's the difference. They trot
Mhm.
out, but the biggest thing that bugs me when they trot out their thing is Bushmills is the world's oldest distillery. And
Yeah. Founded in 1608, which is
yeah,
there was a distillery around there at that time. It
mhm,
wasn't the Bushmills distillery.
yeah. It was a license granted to distill in the county Bushmills operated in, but not specific to Bushmills. And
Mhm.
even by Irish standards, I believe Kilbeggan is older than Bushmills. And
Yeah, if you don't get into the continuously operating,
mhm,
then it is older.
yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway, little bit of controversy there. Always like to touch on it a little bit and
Mhm.
poke a sharp stick where a sharp stick is due.
Yep.
Uh,
Uh,
anything else on that one?
no, I think that's about it. There is some myth about I think brought on by TV and one specific show about this being what is it, Catholic whiskey because it's Northern Ireland, or
No.
a
Oh,
Protestant
Evan,
whiskey. Yeah,
Protestant. Yeah, no,
yeah,
so it's funny, we joke about those things because we're not as connected to them in Canada as people are
yep.
in, say, Ireland or even Scotland, where that Irish Protestant thing that happened in Ireland definitely spills over into Scotland. But I remember a point in time where like people would come in and be like, I'd like a bottle of Irish whiskey. And you'd be like, oh, well, we've got Redbreast and Powers and all. And they'd be like, no, I'm looking for Protestant whiskey. Be like, what? And then occasionally after a while, you figure out, okay, they're talking Bushmills, which is Northern Ireland. I don't know that that's a fair thing, but I think people, it's kind of like the colors they associate with the various tribes. And Jameson is definitely the green tribe as opposed to the blue tribe. But I don't know that it's fair to say that Bushmills was Protestant whiskey. It was just from Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get it. It's when you get
yeah.
into Christianity in general, but even secular Christianity, it gets even weirder. So
Hmm. Okay. All right. I had to rinse my glass and drink the rinsing of it because I didn't think to put a spit cup or something, but not to worry. So, Evan, what have we next? Whiskey number two is single malt Scotch whiskey at 49.4%. We know nothing more than
yeah,
that, or
so
do
this
we?
is uh another distillery on a site that does have some history of distillation, although it is a a, a very newish distillery. This is Lindores Abbey, Casks of Lindores Bourbon Cask Edition 2.
Mhm.
Which is something we picked up as an exclusive to Kensington Wine Market, along with the red wine cask or SDR cask uh, edition two that they did.
And I don't know why I feel the need to qualify this, but we were not looking for these whiskeys.
Hmm.
We were also not looking for a single cask, partly because they were young. The prices we were quoted were too high, but these were presented to us as an option. And I remember having the meeting with the importer before the staff, and I tried them, and I was like, "Oh man, these are
Yeah.
actually pretty good." And the reason I was surprised by that is partly, I think I have a bit of a bias. I've not been a huge fan of the bottle, and I know there's a story behind the bottle and why the bottle is the way it is the bottle, but it's tough packaging. It's hard to get excited about. It's busy. Like there's just so much going on here. And even the neck opening is narrow. It's just not that those things should affect how something tastes, but I tried them and I was like, you know what? I better have my staff sample these with me because I thought the bourbon was excellent. And the STR
Hmm.
one, which I thought a bit gimmicky, and I remember trying the first release of it and it was okay. But I really think the second releases of these, which are a little older, they're bottled at, just under 50%, so they've got a decent ABV. They both showed really well. And that's why, and I think we're halfway through the 20 odd cases of each we committed to of them. They've sold pretty well as well.
Yeah, it's I remember trying these too, and this one I thought was quite good, and it's like it shows as I think this is mostly first fill, and I think it says first fill for everything if I remember
Hmm.
correctly. Um, the bourbon casks are definitely there. There's nothing that noses as refill on this, but at this ABV level, it still seems to be
Hmm.
remarkably balanced for something that's young and all in first fill.
Hmm.
And then the red wine cask, which we did almost put in instead of this one, in the not an advent calendar, was a bit of a discussion. And I think the reason this one went out is we just didn't have a lot of just straight on ex-bourbon casks at the time in the calendar when we were putting the lineup together. But both of them were surprising and just showed remarkably well for
Hmm.
something that's probably 5, 6 years old.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think that's part of it was we wanted to highlight as we do every year, at least one or more um, of the newer distilleries in the range. Uh, the story behind the distilleries, you said, the connection to Scotland, the connection to the first distillation.
Mhm.
It's got an interesting story. The branding, I think, could use some work. I think they might, as the whiskey gets a little older, have a thought about what it should look like moving forward. Uh, I'm not a big fan of when companies change their bottles because, you get used to them. Most of them are pretty good, and a lot of them seem to unnecessarily change their packaging. But the liquid here, I think, is what, you know, sort of drew me to it. As Jen said, this doesn't taste like a $200+ whiskey, but it isn't intended to.
Yeah. And the
It's a
good news
bit,
is it's not a $200+ whiskey
no,
too.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
$100. It's on the high side for how old it is, but the quality's there. And I think the other reason why we put the bourbon in over the STR is that the STR was selling a little slightly better than this was. And, we felt, well, if that's the case, then we'll put this one in. But it's no slouch, and it's nice to see that really naked profile of the spirit. It's very malty. There's a nice spiciness to it. There's nice citrus tones in it as well. Um,
Mhm.
we can talk about the region, even though, I've said a lot of times I feel this is mostly irrelevant, but it's a distillery that I believe it's in Fife. It's in the lowlands technically, although,
Yeah,
that line sort of diagonally heads north. Uh, it it's very pleasant, it's very drinkable,
yeah,
it's worthy of consumption and purchasing.
agreed, agreed. And I think again, the ABV is kind of bang on for making this really drinkable as well.
Hmm.
Um, I think maybe if it was higher, it would maybe come off as a bit too woody and spicy and young.
Hmm.
Um, when it's cut down to this level, it's got this really nice creaminess, good structure, really nice malt notes to it, and some really nice fruit notes coming through too.
Now, I've just got tap water here, which I'm not sure how good that is in this, but I've put in a drop to see what it does, because it does have a little bit of heat. It is a young whiskey. Um, to see how it fared with a drop of water, and it takes it well. It's honeyed, malty, nice vanilla tones, lots of orchard fruits, still a little
Mm.
bit of that citrus spice as well. But I think this is more a signpost of what's to come, as opposed to
Yeah,
this is the end point with this distillery. Some of these newer distilleries are getting close to that 10-year mark. This one I think has still got a couple years to go. Um, but it shows a lot of promise.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a really nice dram and um kind of an interesting counterpoint. I love having tastings like this where you're kind of we started on a 21-year-old. We're now on something with no age statement. Still full of flavor, still has some nice nutty notes in a kind of similar manner to the Bushmills, but
Hmm.
um, shows its youth without being too youthful.
Hmm. Yeah, brash, but not in a bad way.
Absolutely. On to number three.
Hmm. Yes,
Uh, Sticking with youth. This might be is it the third KWM cask in the series now? This is our Ardnamurchan single cask, which is
oh,
one myself, Andrew, and our staff have been very excited to share with people.
hmm.
Um, we've been talking about it even before we got it in. When we got samples of it, we were just floored with the quality. Um, I've talked about Ardnamurchan quite a bit. And have I think it's one of the best under 15-year-old distilleries in the world. I think that just
Hmm.
with that Highland sort of coastal rugged style where they're almost running counter to other distilleries which have gone for this like youthful, fleshy, really good spirit like right out of the still that's almost drinkable. There seems to be a more of a hard-edged and minerality note that can sometimes run counter to that just
Hmm.
easy drinking style, but it still has worked incredibly well for them even at a young age. This guy's 7 and a bit years old, if I remember correctly,
Hmm.
peated, and then just comes off as this curious combination of Springbank and Kilchoman 100% Isla
Hmm.
whiskey for me.
Yeah, Ardnamurchan is, as you said, I think it's not a secret that the staff, we all are pretty excited about the distillery. It now has 10-year-old whiskey, which is also uh, pretty cool. Uh, they make both an unpeated and a peated spirit. The peated spirit uses just distiller's yeast. It's peated, I think, around 35 parts per million is my recollection, somewhere in that range. Someone corrected me on this at one point in time. Uh, the resulting ppms, though, are a little lower, but it's young, so you're still going to see a little bit of that peat. Their unpeated distillate, they use both brewers and distillers yeast. But what is similar with the two distillates is they're using longer fermentations. The distillery, which has been built to be run sustainably, I believe they use a biofuel burner for
Mhm.
generation of electricity and energy. Um, Even though they've tried to make it modern and environmentally friendly, they're also making a fairly old school style of spirit, which is quite cool.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at their core range single malt, it's a typically a blend of the peated and the unpeated style. Whereas this is a single cask, it's a straight peated single cask. So it's going to be just distiller's yeast as opposed to that combo, but it's still longer fermentation, still slow distillation. And yeah, I mean, we've been watching this from the like they were releasing those update bottlings at 1 and 2 years of age. We've been watching this one come along. It shows well. When it first came out, they were fairly pricey, but I think they
Yeah.
realized, and I before a lot of the others did, that there was this all these other new distilleries coming, and they managed to get their price to a really good sweet spot. Their single malt core release now, I think, is around $78, something like that. Obviously, a single cask is going to be a little bit pricier, just for the privilege of doing it, the fact that it's at cask strength. But Evan, I don't know if you remember this, the first two cask samples they sent us were not to our liking. And I think that was
Yeah.
not because they weren't good. I think it's because they got the impression we wanted something that tasted young. What
Yeah.
I think I'd meant to say was that we weren't afraid of the fact that the spirit was young.
Hmm.
We wanted it to be good, but we weren't afraid of like the age. The age wasn't the criteria. The quality of the whiskey was the number one
Yeah.
criteria.
Yeah. And I think although their unpeated stuff is really good as well, I think their peated stuff shows better at this age as well. Um, it does have this really cool sort of lactic cheesiness that certain distilleries get.
Hmm.
Um, Port Charlotte is one that always jumps out to me from Brook of having that lactic cheesy note. Um, Springbank gets it from time to time as well, but
Hmm.
it just has this combination of rustic qualities plus surprising approachability for
Hmm.
something at this age and at this ABV.
Hmm. Well, I think we've talked about this in a lot of tastings and probably in previous Advent tastings as well, Evan. But
Mhm.
for younger whiskeys, having peat in the mix does seem to make the younger whiskeys a bit more forgiving. They're a bit
Absolutely.
easier to approach as long as you can handle peat. I think having that extra element in there can help mask some of the youth of the spirit, but
Yep.
also the other element is for people who really love that element. When it's in there, it's a fading component. The potency of the peat, the smoke is gonna fade over time as it matures. It's not going to increase. And so if you like that, you're gonna like younger whiskeys. And it's kind of like how people who really love heavily peated Ardbeg were probably disappointed when they tried the 20 something releases they did, because
Mhm.
what they really loved were the sub 10-year-old releases like Corey Vrecken and Wee Beastie, and they wanted
Absolutely.
that brash, raw, young peated single malt, and that's what they got with those. But when you get that older, more mature one, you're getting something a little different.
Yeah. Well, and the one of the things that Ardnamurchan's had going for it since inception was um, they were they were founded by a company where the company was in a position to build a distillery. This wasn't just they were building a distillery and then hoping to make money from it or needed to release stuff to make money
Hmm.
immediately, which is not where everybody starts from. It's owned by Adelphi, which is an independent bottler and has been around for Adelphi's been around for about, well, they just celebrated their 30th anniversary, I think it was, wasn't it?
Hmm.
Uh, so, well, maybe it wasn't necessarily the deepest pockets in the world. They didn't have a gun to their head saying you must release by this date. They did give us a few non-whiskey releases to tease what they had, but they've also been able to be relatively patient and choosy with what they have released up to this point.
Hmm. Some interesting similarities with distillate. You already mentioned it before, Evan, like
Mhm.
Kilholman. The peat profile's a little different though.
Yeah,
I find it's quite a bit more ashy,
yeah,
and not, quite as medicinal as you find Isla Peat goes. It is effectively a coastal dram. I mean, Ardnamurchan might as well be on an island. It's on this peninsula that juts out above the island of Mull. It's probably the most remote mainland distillery in Scotland. Like it's a
Mhm.
trek to get there. It's an incredible drive. If you like driving, it's like a bike path that hugs the coast and it just twists and turns. If it's raining, you get the added benefit of water spilling across the road, which is exciting. If you do not like driving, it's probably not the most fun distillery to make your way to, probably the least
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would have enjoyed driving there, everyone, given you've experienced driving Scotland with me previously.
Well, I survived. Like I'd do it just to say I did it as a passenger.
Hmm.
Um, I do kind of miss that feeling of being the passenger or the map guy in the rally car that I
Hmm.
got a feel of on our way to the ferry to Erin. But
Probably should have got you a helmet.
that's right, that's right, and a map at that point too. But
I knew where I
uh,
was going.
that's right.
You were just the oh shit guy. Like, oh
Yeah,
shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, as we go around a
yeah.
corner.
Yeah, I videoed just as sort of like to try and black box it in case anything happened to the car, essentially at that point. But I gotta say that like I've been really fond of this dram. I'm glad we got it in the calendar. I've added water to it, and it gets this really neat fresh oregano note for me right on the nose.
I can see that even now. It does have that like Italian spice
Hmm.
blend sort of vibe, even on the palate. Like a little bit of focaccia with olive oil and some, fresh sage.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, cool stuff.
Tasty. Okay. Well, that's the Ardnamurchan. Yeah, our first cask, the first retail exclusive cask to come to Canada. I believe a
Hmm.
Quebec whiskey club beat us slightly to the first single cask in Canada. Well, I mean, there was a market cask as well too, so I guess there's been a couple,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
Le Club de Scotch Whiskey de Quebec beat us by a month or two with their own cask.
Hmm. Well, hopefully we'll see a few more casts in the future. On to number four, where we're going from young to old now. This is the oldest whiskey in this series of five. This is Gordon and MacPhail distillery label Mortlach 25-year-old, bottled at a pleasant 46% alcohol. This guy for years and years was a 43 percenter. They put the 15 and 25-year-old of Mortlach and Linkwood up to 46 in the last 3 or 4 years, I think.
Mhm.
And I'm very happy that they did. I think it just gets a bit more structure here. And we did the 15-year-old Mortlock in last year's calendar. We did the 15 and the 25, or we did the 25-year-old Linkwood in the Uber calendar, if I remember correctly as well.
Mhm.
But this is the first G&M distillery label that we featured in this year's, not an advent calendar.
Yeah, and sorry, I mean, just be clear, this is the Mortlach or the Liquid?
This is the Mortlock.
Okay, just want to make sure I'm putting the right one up here.
Yeah.
Um,
Otherwise, if it's not, then just completely ignore the blog post I did, I guess.
we hope it's Mortlach. Otherwise,
Yeah.
um, Evan's Evan's blog post and tasting note had to bend to meet the description of the whiskey.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, this is their distillery range from Gore MacPhail. These are great whiskeys to work with because they're still incredible value.
Yeah.
You look at what this sells for and compare it to what things like Mortlach did they replace the 25 with a 26 or something, didn't they?
Yeah,
When
something
they
like that.
rebranded, but it's still, I think, well north of $1,000. There's a lot of distilleries that are still trying to push that envelope, like Dalmore, Macallan, obviously leading the pack. And it'll be interesting to see how they have to walk those prices back because they will, if they ever want to get some market share back. Because this is just comparatively such good value for
Yep.
good quality, good good quality oak matured whiskey from a distillery that now has a relatively well-known reputation. It might not have previously, um, but certainly in the last 10 years, Mortlach has gotten more of a following, and uh, Yeah, that these G&M bottlings are excellent. And we don't see
Yeah.
too many old distillery bottlings from Mortlach anymore.
No, no,
Or
I think
sorry, or
they've,
Independence really.
yeah, yeah, we've had a few. We had, yeah, Kelly put her hand up there.
Mm.
We did
So fair
do
points.
fantastic single cask, sherry cask. I think it was Oloroso cask finish, Mortlach from the SMWS last year in the Uber calendar. That was
Mhm.
just this massive, bold Mortlach. That was still near 60% alcohol, if I remember correctly. It was a fantastic dram. Um, Marty here, Marty of Kensington Mine Market says has that wee witchy tone to it. Um, I agree. This does go into a little bit of the meatiness, although I think the meatiness is kept in check quite
Mhm.
nicely as well by the sherry and everything else going on. Some really
It,
nice fruit notes in there.
it's interesting how this whiskey changes a little bit from batch to batch. I mean,
Mhm.
I haven't put this up on the screen yet. I was gonna pop it up. But I don't know that the color on the photo that we have right now is probably current because this
Mhm.
seems a little less sherried than that photo would imply, even just looking at the bottle I have here. But
Mhm.
this is also G&M sherry, which is a kind of, from the most part, a slightly different style of sherry than you get from most distilleries because it's
Yeah.
longer seasoning, thicker stave. You tend to get a less aggressive, slower maturation in those casks than you do in a standard sherry seasoned cask, which I think speaks to the profile of this. I mean, you would think a mix of first fill and refill sherry after 25 years, this should be a lot darker and richer than it is, but the maturation on this has actually been quite soft.
Yeah. Steve says went from pears to baked apples to me. I like that baked apple note. And I talked about this being 46. I think this dram works really nicely at 46% alcohol.
Mhm.
It'd always be fun to see it at higher, but I don't think it needs to be lower.
When I think it's on the verge, like it's not quite there yet, but if this was left a little longer, it's on the verge of starting to go tropical
Yeah,
because the sherry's not strong enough to wash that out in the spirit. The interesting thing is it's not super meaty.
no. And it does, I agree with the tropical, like there's even, it's going into these really nice marmalade notes on the palate and the finish for me.
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah, without question, this is the fruitiest whiskey in the range. But that seems to be the overwhelming profile. It doesn't have any of that meaty, slightly sulfury profile. Um,
Yeah,
that Marty was alluding to, or that you would expect from Mortlach. I mean, it's famously supposed to be a whiskey that pairs well with sherry because it's got that slightly sulfury, meaty backbone to it. But this has been
mhm,
tamed really nicely.
absolutely.
Uh, there's no parallel here, Evan, but it does make me think back on that Mortlach cask that we had a number of years ago from G&M. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember that one. It was bourbon, and it was like a 20-something bourbon cask, and it was
yeah,
so tropical. And there's shades of that here. I mean, that was just like kind of thick, honeyed, creamy, tropical. But both of those had that lighter profile. Like this is a fairly
yeah.
light profile for Mortlach after 25 years.
Hmm. Yeah, light and lively. Like there's nothing that's like necessarily and just like dragging you down into its depths
Mhm.
stylistically with the sherry, which I mean there's a lot of those. If you go older in GNM, a lot of those older GNM drams do where
Mhm.
the sherry just gets so thick and rich that you can't climb your way out of it, which I
Mhm.
absolutely adore. But a lot of the profiles for those whiskeys just tend to go into sherry and
Mhm.
nothing else in a lot of cases. This does have a lot more than just sherry going on.
Okay. I've previewed the last one because I'm trying to rinse my glass with the whiskey before I taste it because obviously my single glass here is I can't clean it properly between each run. But Evan, we're moving on to something quite peaty for this
Yes.
last one.
So this may be our first Port Charlotte
Oh,
in a whiskey calendar. This is the Rest and Be Thankful Port Charlotte 14-year-old single cask from an ex-bourbon barrel, if I remember correctly. and from the Rest and Be Thankful Whiskey and Rum Company. So Port Charlotte, of course, is a more heavily peated, or a heavily peated style from Bruichladdich Distillery. Not their most peated style, of course, that would be Octomore. But it's named after a distillery that did used to exist on Isla up until around World War I or so, if I remember correctly. And a lot of what Bruichladdich now does produce for Port Charlotte, they mature in the old part, or some of the old Port Charlotte warehouses, if I remember correctly too.
Yeah, there's only a couple of warehouses left in Port Charlotte. They're still there. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, for whatever reason, and I almost brought him up earlier in the tasting, but this whiskey makes me think of Mark
Yep.
Renier because uh, touching on Irish whiskey and the situation that's arisen there with Waterford and kind of, I don't know, and Mark Renier, who wanted while he was at Bruichladdich to revive Port Charlotte,
Yes.
he wanted to reopen it, and it never happened. And before it did, Remy Cointreau bought the company out, and I believe it's still on the back burners that maybe someday it'll happen, but I suspect it won't happen
Yeah.
anytime soon. But you know, with all the news with this one guy, it does make me reflect on this because while on the one hand, he's I'm so torn because he's visionary, he's got some great ideas, but
Yep.
then like his own worst enemy, he can't see past his vision to make decisions that are maybe slightly more attainable and modest. But at the same time, like, Port Charlotte is such a great spirit. A lot of this was really his drive that had these things happen. I mean, Jim McEwen could tell the story about the first time he made Octomore, but almost certainly it was Mark Renier driving a lot of those decisions.
Mhm.
The Isla Barley business was all Mark Renier. And
Yep.
just as a person and as a kind of a visionary in this entrepreneur, I got a lot of respect for the guy. But yeah, this is kind of a contemplative whiskey for me because yeah, it just makes me think of Mark Renier and sitting in his office and having him lecture me about Isla Barley for 3 hours one day, many, many years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it kind of ties the start and end of this range of whiskeys together for me.
Yeah, and that's something without mentioning his name, I did talk about that a bit in the or for most of the blog posts that I did where and talking about the idea of reviving Port Charlotte at one time.
Mhm.
And it like a very much a hindsight thing given the news of Waterford closing and Renegade Rum Distillery being sold off in September. Um, it made me think of what if it was still sort of like the small group of investors that they had that reopened Bruichladdich under Murray McDavid,
Mhm.
and what if they were still in charge and the cynic in me thinks that they probably would have been in the same situation that Waterford is in now, but 5 years ago, where
Mhm.
they just would have ran out of money at some point,
Well,
potentially.
I think that was the struggle is that
Yeah,
Bruichladdich, even in the years leading up to when they got bought by Remy Cointreau, was treading water to a certain extent.
yeah,
And they got a big payday, and Mark parlayed that into to building Waterford. But having
mhm,
visited Waterford and seen it, like the vision was way too big for what he actually probably could have been able to do. And I think that in the end, it was like the hubris of it. It was
yeah,
too big and too grand. And before he made sure that was like rock solid and firm, he's got this great idea. Well, we could do this for rum. So I should go
yeah,
open a rum distillery. And I mean, it's sad because I certainly hope that Waterford will get rescued and be
yeah,
brought back by people that'll see what he's done and you know, build upon that because there's just some incredible assets there. There's some great bones there for a future brand, but I think at the same time, like his own inflexibility of vision,
yeah.
like
Lack of compromise.
we never saw anything from Waterford that was not a mix of wine, virgin oak, bourbon sherry and Van Du Naturel casks. Like, why couldn't we see a straight bourbon release just to see what the
Yeah.
spirit tastes like?
Well, and it was that was, in my opinion, is the most frustrating part of what we've seen with Waterford, although we're digressing here, is
Hmm.
that they put so much thought into the provenance and the fields
Hmm.
that produce the barley and the barley strains and stuff, which is amazing. But then by the time it gets to your lips, it's seen so many different casks that
Hmm.
you don't know what the grain is and what the barrel is given it. It's
Well,
just it's kind of lost in the shuffle.
I think where I'm going with this, Evan, onto the Port Charlotte is,
Yeah,
you know, as much as it would be nice to be romantic to view what would Brooklotti be today if it was still that same original team running it, I don't know that it would be as coherent as it is today,
yep,
in the sense of we know what Port Charlotte is, we know what it tastes like, we know what Octomore is. Like, most of the team is still there. Like, the people that
yep.
Jim and Duncan and Mark hired and trained, a lot of them are still
Mentored,
there
yep.
and are now
Yeah,
running
still
the
has Adam
place.
Hannett as their distiller,
Yeah,
and yep,
like all those people. And I think, it's almost as if, for me, the way I feel about Mark is like he's a great idea guy. You should get the idea, give people the vision, and then let them run it. And it because I think with right now what we're seeing with the Brooklotti 18, the older Port Charlottes that we've tried, they're excellent whiskeys. They made some incredible stuff back then, but at the end of the day, like, the kind of person that can get people excited about a startup project is not maybe the best person to keep it running in the long run. So
yeah, absolutely.
that.
Well, and for this dram, like this was, I think Sean was talking about this a while back too, where he really enjoys this whiskey, if I remember correctly. I am guilty of kind of not having tried a lot of the Rest and B lineup.
Mhm.
So it's a bit of a blind spot for me, but I love this whiskey. Like at 14 years old, it has the sort of the cheesiness that's like Port Charlotte's MO for me, is that lactic cheesy note right up front, either smoked applewood or even into a smoky Gouda for me. But
Mhm.
it's got these wonderful fruit notes coming through, and it still has this youthfulness to the
Mhm.
spirit as well, where it's very spirit driven in style.
Yeah.
Just a really neat dram.
So the rest and B stuff has been interesting because we've seen a mix of it. A lot of it is true to Mark Renier's style, because I actually think a lot of these casks may have come through him at some point in time. And
Mhm.
I'll explain why in a moment. Uh, the wine ones, most of them are okay, but the ones that I've really loved from this Rest and Be line, but this is true of Bruichladdich in general, is the ex-bourbon stuff, both the Port Charlotte and the Bruichladdich, because it allows those natural lactic, funky flavors to come through. It
Mhm.
allows for that esterification, for those fruitier flavors to come through. Like, what's lovely about this Port Charlotte 14 year is you've got these nice citrus notes that are balancing out this seafoody ceviche note.
Yep.
And it's because their distillate is so good. It's because of how they made it, because of their fermentations, their slow distillation, their very, very slow distillation of Bruichladdich. The DNA of that spirit is excellent. And I think the frustrating thing from the Rest and Be guys line is like, why aren't you guys interested in these wine casts? And it's because to be honest, I'm not. Like, they're okay,
Yep.
but the wine is hiding all these really cool, fun, funky spirit
Absolutely.
flavors that we want. And the kind of people that are buying $220 14-year-old Isla whiskeys are buying them because they're whiskey geeks and they want to try things that are fun. I think
Yep.
some of the wine notes, the wine profile cast just went too far, and I think they've tired people a lot of people out, myself included. So
Yep.
this is classic. That's what I like about it. This is classic whiskey. It shows what Port Charlotte at mid-teens can be.
Yep. I went off on a bit of a jag on the end of the blog post on this one too, where I kind of see Rest and Be as they are now as almost the spiritual successors to Murray McDavid.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe there's a bit of ownership overlap. I know Murray McDavid was sold after Bruichladdich was sold essentially to different company, and they're still in operation. We just haven't seen any of their bottlings over on this side of the pond.
No,
Uh,
Murray McDavid is actually here. Another whiskey
oh,
shop
is
at the
it?
moment has exclusivity on some of their stuff.
Hmm.
I don't think there's no connection between the old ownership. That brand got sold
Yeah,
off.
absolutely.
But I think to where you were going, Evan, is I think there is a connection between Mark Renier and Reston B, and it's a company called Fox Fitzgerald, which
Yeah.
managed the export for Waterford, but also Reston B, and I think there might be some tie-ins there. And
Yeah.
whether
Well, and
Mark,
McEwen was part of it for a little bit there too, I believe,
mhm, yeah,
at the beginning.
what whether Mark was a part of or is a part of Reston B, I don't know, but I suspect a lot of these casks came through him at some point in time.
Mhm.
And that's why their portfolio is rum and basically Bruichladdich stuff with a little bit of
Yep.
Kalila and some other new distilleries thrown in.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's our lineup. Are you gonna try and lightning round it by
Yeah,
just putting the
I'm just
bottles up
gonna
your
I'm
nose?
just gonna lightning round by taking a sip straight from the bottle in a classy
Nice.
fashion. So
Yeah.
let's go back to Bushmills.
Yeah. Next time maybe we'll have to order Glencairn bottles just to make it more official. So yeah, the Bushmills, surprisingly, the nose is holding up after that last bit of
Mm,
peat from the Port Charlotte for me. It's still really nice and fruity. Has that sort of walnut and almonds note and some really nice toastiness to it.
mhm. I love how the palate is still so malty, considering this is
Yeah,
triple distilled. It's 21 years of age. The mouthfeel on this is great, despite the fact it's 40%.
yeah,
All I'll say, and I think is this is this is very good whiskey. It could be great whiskey if they had the vision to
yeah,
bottle it at 3 to 6 degrees higher. It could be
yeah.
so much better.
Yeah, seeing this at 46 or 50, I think would be a real eye-opening experience. But I can see why this dram is so well loved.
Mhm,
Not just for Irish whiskey, but whiskey in general. This is like a very cherished dram for a lot of people, and
mhm.
at 40%, it's pretty easy drinking and something that you can have in your glass and pay attention to it or not pay attention to it as you wish,
Well,
and
and
be pretty happy with what you're drinking.
let's talk about the value side of it too, which I think is
Hmm.
not to be ignored. It's $200. It's frequently on sale at a pretty
Yep,
fair discount as well. Um, you know, that has to be said as well. I mean, like this is less expensive, I think, slightly less expensive than the Port Charlotte 14. So
yep,
it's good value. But bottle it higher, Proximo, please.
absolutely.
Lind
Next up is back to what is this one? This is
Lindores.
the Lindores Abbey Castle
Oh,
Lindores Bourbon Cask, 49.4%, is it? Yeah.
yeah. I can't comment on how the nose may have changed or how it's improved in the glass, but it's still lush and creamy and floral with some nice fruity tones, like lots of apple, citrus. Um, yeah, it holds
Yeah.
up well.
Yeah, the nose has this really nice sort of combination of angel food cake and like a fresh glazed donut on the nose for me right now
You're
that I
trying to
think
make me
works really
hungry, Evan.
nicely. Yeah,
It's working. Um, yeah, it drinks well. I mean, it clearly doesn't have the finesse of the 21, but it makes up for that in in character and the weight of the spirit.
yeah, and like you said, first time around, like that character, it's youthful, but it's not out of whack. It's not
Hmm.
the kid that you wish him and his parents would get kicked out of the restaurant. Um, it's not necessarily the polite one that's just sitting there quietly at the table, but you're not
Hmm.
offended by anything the kid is doing. He's just having
Hmm.
fun.
Yeah. What's number three?
Number three is
Ardnamurchan?
yeah, the Ardnamurchan. Really soft in comparison to the first time around on the nose for me. I think I added a bit of water to it, so that might be why. Some nice chalkiness on the nose right now, though, too.
Hmm. Yeah, really nice minerality on the spirit. cheesy, ashy, fruity. Something that makes me think of like a mezcal margarita, like
Yep.
lime, salt, and that sort of smoky, not medicinal, but yeah, an exotic smoke.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just love how that they've kind of, I don't, it's probably intentional, but it almost seems like they've fallen into this combination of like a relatively heavy minerality and still a very drinkable dram at a young age. That's got to be quite a feat to pull off.
Hmm. There we go. All right.
Next up for number 4 is the Mortlach 25 from G&M.
It's a little meatier now. Like you can see a bit of that Mortlach profile coming through. Leathery, some tobacco, a bit of dried fruits, but creamy as well. Like there's this nice underlying layer of vanilla cream. Um, and it's yeah, it's still slightly on the tropical side. It's not quite going tropical, but it's sort of in that direction.
Yeah, it's nice because it's like it's cohesive still. Like there's a lot going on. It
Mhm,
nothing's kind of seasons out of whack for me.
mhm,
Um, or disjointed, but it's just a really nice dram.
mhm. Um, and for those who despair that Gordon MacPhail is no longer filling casks of whiskey, just remember that they will be able to bottle Mortlach 25 for another 23 years. Um, so yeah. And you never know, maybe they'll start buying Mortlach again because Diageo's will come hat in hand. Please, sir, will you buy another?
Yeah. Now we're trying to fund our vodka brands and they're just not moving. Can you do
Yeah,
something for us?
yeah, we got to get rid of. Are they the ones that have the brand with Diddy? We got to get rid of Diddy.
Ooh.
Um, I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, that would not be a good look right now.
uh, what are we wrapping on? Oh yeah, Port Charlotte. How
Yeah,
could we
rest in
forget?
B.
It was the one that we spoke the least about, but not in terms of volume, but specifics.
Yeah. Yeah, like Mark Renier, we kind of went off on a tangent there.
Mhm. Ah, poor Mark. I'm sure he'll land on his feet.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, that's very tasty. Uh, curiously, quite I think most reminiscent to me, if I was going to compare to another distillery to Kilholman.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but like I really like that funk to it. It's got a really nice funk
Yeah.
to it. I love the bourbon. This has got to be refill bourbon. It is such a light touch on the oak side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's does it say? Let me double check here. It's interesting too because on their own website they say this is a European exclusive, which is interesting too.
We have
So
our ways, Evan. Those
that's
guys,
right.
the two guys that they're French that run this company. They're nice guys. I forget their names right now, but they're fond of us. So the
Very
European
cool.
exclusive thing doesn't matter. Um, they're happy to work with us. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it says ex-bourbon hogshead for this one, so probably refill.
probably it's got to be refill. It's pale, but it's spirity. But that's I think what we like about it. It's I'd love to see more of these Port Charlottes, not wine cask, straight bourbon first, or refill sherry to be fair, but left to mature until they're like 18 to 20 years of age. Um, the world needs more of that.
Yeah. Question from Tom asking if I'm guessing he's talking Mark Renier. Is he Canadian or French? Odd name for someone in Scotland. I think he's
He's
American, isn't he?
English. No, he's Mark Renier
English,
is
pardon me.
English. Um, yeah, he's an English chap. Was a wine merchant. Made
For
his
years.
money
Yep.
there. Uh, had connections in that, as does Simon Coughlin, who is still working for the distillery today. He was one of Mark's partners. Um, and no, he moved over to Ireland. And I mean, I kind of love the cheek of it, but like he opened an Irish distillery and chose to spell whiskey without an E and
Yep.
never, and like at least for the first while, was never playing up on the fact it was Irish. That wasn't important to him. What was important was the terroir. This is a
Yeah.
terroir driven whiskey. It's not Irish whiskey.
Yeah. He,
But
he
again,
he
it's
more
just
wanted it to be French than Irish.
no, he has his way of looking at the world, and it's kind of
Yeah.
like you need to view it the way he does. And if you don't, you know,
Yeah.
that's too bad. But I mean, the sad thing is that like, the guy had some great ideas. He needed somebody
Yep.
to like contain them and maybe deselect some of them.
Mhm.
Uh, but the whiskey, I mean, like the whiskey that Bruichladdich made, the whiskey that Waterford made, it's all excellent. Great vision, and whatever happens, we'll see the benefit of this in the decades ahead, no matter
Absolutely.
what.
If only
Uh,
we could all view the world through Mark tinted glasses.
that's right.
Yeah.
Uh, well, just the one funny little side story is he had this Jack Russell Terrier, and I had two customers with me, maybe three, on this one trip to Bruichladdich. We were in his office for hours while he lectured us about barley and terroir. And this is way, way, way. This is at Bruichladdich, way before Waterford. And I remember at one point in time, like I was too polite to leave, but I was like dying of boredom. And the one thing that rescued me was his Jack Russell Terrier that was trying to like shred my fingers. And that was the one thing that kept me grounded in reality was his dog
Nice.
trying to gnaw my hand off. Um, Dogs, who knew? They have so many benefits.
That's right.
Uh,
Well, here is the poll. Andrew, what are your two favorites? And
Two
do your
favorites.
favorites change based on whether it was from the tiny glass or from the tiny bottle?
Oh man. Well, that's the problem is I can't go back and compare back and forth.
Hmm.
Uh yeah, to be honest, I think if I had to pick favorites, and this surprises me because I think that Gordon MacPhail Mortlach would have been high on the list. But tonight I think I'm all about like very plain casks. My favorite I think is that Port Charlotte 14. Uh,
Cool.
my second favorite is the Ardnamurchan. I love the funk on it. And even though it's youthful, I think the spirit's really fun. And my third favorite, because I'm going to pick a third, is the Bushmills 21. I don't want it to be the Bushmills 21, but of all these whiskeys, if I wanted to just sit by the fireplace and drink one
Yeah.
without thinking about it, that would be the one that I could, but I'd be moaning the whole time. God, why can't they bottle this a little more, a little
Yeah.
higher?
Yeah. 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 Putting it close to the fire just so it might like reduce a little bit the water and not the alcohol.
Mhm.
Um, but I, I'm kind of agreeing with you. I'm not going to pick it as I'll probably pick it as my third favorite actually. That Bushmills. We had this Bushmills 21 in the 21-year-olds tasting that we did, and in my opinion, it did not show as well. It did not hold up. In this lineup, even with a few at cast strength, it's doing quite nicely after twice through for me, which is
Mhm.
kudos to it. Again, would love to see it like Andrew at a higher ABV, but uh, it is a pretty good 40%er if you got to have a 40%er. So there's that going for it.
Mhm.
My second favorite, I kind of want to put the Mortlach in there, but I'm going to go with the Casks of Lindores. I really like how it's kind of just like a good kid sitting in a restaurant. Like it's having fun, but it's not. Its parents aren't making the servers babysit, which is always
Mhm.
a good sign.
Mhm.
But it just shows really nicely. And then
Mhm.
my first favorite is that Ardnamurchan. I love that single
Yeah.
cask, and I've been incredibly impressed with their whiskey. And this continues the trend. So
Mhm.
that's what I got.
I mean, yeah, I'm back to nosing that more like 25. It's lovely. I,
Yep.
I am being given the signal that my time is running out here. So Evan, what cheeky third question did you have for us today? I
Oh yeah.
looked and then I didn't have time.
Well, let's close the poll off. There's 38 for 40
Mhm.
that have given their thoughts on this. So first favorite of the night is the J&M Mortlach 25-year-old with 15 votes. Second place is the Rest in B Port Charlotte. Not upset with that at all. I think this was a pretty stellar lineup actually, where everything deserves votes. I guess I did first favorite twice instead of putting second favorite in there, so apologies. But second favorite of the night is again the G&M Mortlach 25 with 9 votes. And then a tie with 7 votes each, the Rest in B Port Charlotte and the Ardnamurchan. And the Bushmills getting some pretty good votes in through all of it. Casks Lindores seems to be the one not winner in this lineup of 5, but
Oh, I mean,
maybe because it shows in a different, like in a sort of a less exuberant manner.
it got votes for second favorite. So
It did.
yeah.
So
So
it didn't get 0, which is good.
well, Evan, I think so far in 3 tastings, we have yet to have a whiskey that didn't get a vote in either first round or second round.
Yeah,
So
which is good.
that shows that there has yet to be a dud in the lineup so far, is what I'm taking away from
Absolutely. And then the third vote is was a
that.
quick one on best tasting set so far. And maybe because, well, days 11 to 15, I have a short-term memory and I can only recall what is right in front of me, won it with 12 votes. Second favorite tasting so far is days 6 to 10. Great swing of flavor profiles, which got 10 votes. And then last place is days 1 to 5. Love All That Pete with 8 votes. Probably just has more to do with a recency bias than anything else, but good to hear that we've got a bit of a spread there.
Indeed. Well, uh, Evan, I unfortunately have to call it a night. But this was a fun tasting done from a
Yeah.
mysterious, undisclosed location with only one glass. But it was a good range tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I don't know if you're sticking around, but I'm not.
I unfortunately have to run as well, but um, I'll maybe just keep it going and we'll see if I'll just make someone co-host at random and we'll see what
All right.
happens if